Are are we live? Yes, we are live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's stream. And as you can see, today will be another D&D stream, talking about my campaigns. Hey, yo, floating list. How's it going? Talking about my campaign, and today we're going to be focusing around magic items. Sup to you, Gremlin Hunter. See you intentionally spelling my name funny. So, let's hop on over and take a look. Ah, there we go. And a proper dapper hat here. So let's see. Did make it last week's didn't make it. Okay. Well, the VOD should still be up, and I'm currently working on setting up an archive YouTube channel because I did get it downloaded and have that set up so that I can go ahead and make sure everything is archived for people to watch going forward. This particular stream I'm really enjoying, and I love sharing the ungodly amounts of lore, items, classes, and features I've made for my current campaign. And with that, all right. We'll go ahead and get ourselves loaded up. And we're going to be talking about making magic items today. How I go about making magic items, why different DMs will end up making magic items that don't already exist. I'll be going through and giving you guys a lot of examples of ones I've made, partly to show off, and partly just to help me kind of give examples. Once we get through that, I'll be opening everything up for questions from y'all, or to share some of your favorite magic items you've ever encountered, or stories, or how you go about making them. Once we're done with all of that, I'm going to go ahead and tell you the next couple of stories for my D&D campaign. As last time we covered session 1, today we'll be going over sessions 2 and 3, and for those of you dropping by, don't worry, we'll do a really quick recap of what happened. But for now, we are going to be discussing the crafting of magic items. Why, how, and what I like to do about them. So, for me, when looking at just making a homebrew magic item, the truth is there's already a lot of existing magic items for D&D 5th edition, which is what I currently play, and even more from older editions. So if you're ever looking for inspiration or just want to grab something that should already be created, there's always tons of places to go to find existing stuff or other people's homebrew. But whenever you're DMing, there are several reasons why you might feel the need or the desire to actually homebrew your own magic items. Now, one of the most obvious of these is, of course, making the MacGuffin, that special magic thing that your party needs to complete the quest. However, there are also some more interesting reasons. One I use a lot is trying to explain why a character has certain abilities or attributes. This is especially useful for powerful NPCs, creatures like hags, basically intelligent creatures with magical ability and the strategic smarts to get equipment and plan ahead for events. Things with unique abilities that items can help you both explain and reward your players for beating. Another major reason is trying to make certain very expensive items, abilities, or traits more accessible. Another reason is in your campaign, your players or your party is specifically working towards something specific, whether for their character, whether the party's trying to craft a magic item, or just something you've seen a player continually trying to make happen that isn't a natural feature they're going to encounter through progression. One of my favorite reasons to make magic items is actually to add history or lore. Howdy, Akuji. Welcome on in. We're talking about why I make magic items or why I go about homebrewing some of them. So the reason is to add history or lore to your world. Magic items, particularly that bear names or come with manuscripts and how they were made, are great for revealing a bit about your world. And the final reason is, of course, as a DM, you're just having way too much fun making stuff, or you're having way too much fun cursing stuff. So we'll go ahead and break down quite a few of these, though we're going to be focusing on why I go about making magic items, how I go about it, and the type of items I tend to get out of my own process. So for that, we're actually going to be skipping over talking about MacGuffins. I find most people, when they're making a magic MacGuffin, they tend to already know what they need the item to basically do or represent. And so you've already got quite a few of the steps for making it. Plus, I'm not the type to be super MacGuffin-y myself. Not to say there's any issue with a plot driven by an important item, but more so, I find when my items become important, I like it to be more incidental than prophetic, I suppose. So then, let's pop on over to my magic items. And the first group we're going to be talking about today is trying to make something more accessible for your players. In my campaign, I know a lot of my players have had ideas for magic items that have either previously existed or exist but are very, we're just getting into it, Sans. I'm just now talking about my, why I go about making certain magic items. And what we're talking about right now is the kind I make to help make certain features, abilities more accessible to my players. A great example is in my party, I have a monk who is very interested in trying to min-max his AC, and after a few recent very hard battles has been pushing to try and find an amulet or bracers of protection. Now, as a thing to know is just with a lot of higher level magic items, especially those that affect AC, they could very easily become prohibitively expensive, or if you're just handing them out, they can end up breaking certain elements of encounters for you, especially with consistent passive bonuses for having an item equipped. However, I do know my player really wants to play around with min-maxing his AC, and is a little strapped for cash for affording something on the rarer side, like an amulet of protection. So this is where I worked on building a little special something that I called a shield shard. Going into making this item was really easy because I knew the problem that I had and how I wanted to solve it. I wanted to be able to give my player a cheap option to increase their AC, but something that wasn't on the same power level as an amulet of protection, something that's a continuous passive buff that is not supposed to be reached until later levels. So I decided to go about making something that's a consumable. I call this the shield shard. A small crystal-like shard that occasionally dances with blue and white sparks. As a bonus action, you may spend a counter to shatter the shard against yourself or an adjacent ally. This immediately consumes the shard and grants the target a +1 bonus to AC and saving throws for 1 hour. Now, this is definitely one of the simpler types of items you can make. Something that is basically a consumable version of a much bigger, rarer, or more expensive item someone might want. What this did allow me to do, though, was now offer up to my player who really wanted to be messing around with their AC something much more affordable, but also a bit less pushing them into the higher CR ratings that would be needed to really challenge them anymore. I believe there is actually a collection of prices you can find out there called Sane Magic Prices that really goes down the list of how expensive a lot of magic items would probably be. And with Amulets of Protection, they push themselves, think quite a bit over 1,000 gold pieces, which is not something this particular player, nor even a majority of the party, could really get into. However, by making a one-off magic item to fulfill a similar purpose, I'm able to take that and just from making it consumable, drop that price drastically and offer it up as something that players can use. Another thing that I encountered was a player really wanting kind of the older edition's version of a blink dagger, or a weapon you can throw and that will return to you instantly. This is another very high level magic item, and something that is, I think, a lot of players encounter a desire for. A weapon that just keeps returning to you, something just Thor hammerous, something with almost a personality to it. Unfortunately, much like amulets of protection, those tend to be either very expensive or very powerful. And also, sometimes you just want to add a bit more character to an item. So when I knew one of my players, or actually multiple of my players, were looking around for these returning items, these weapons that you could throw and return to you, I went about making something a slightly weaker version of that, but I think something that came with a bit more character to it. At least I hoped it kind of came across that way, which I called the linked climbing daggers. This pair of hooked climbing daggers are linked by a thin enchanted chain. You have a +1 bonus to attack and damage rolls made with this magic weapon. The magic daggers are bound by a magic chain able to extend and shrink itself to match its needs. The chain length can reach up to 30 feet and shrinks down to 6 inches. While attached to the chain, the daggers cannot be thrown further than 30 feet. You can, as a free action, detach or reattach each dagger from the chain. However, once removed, the daggers are no longer considered magical. Once reattached, they regain their +1 enchantment. However, this can only affect the original daggers that have been bound to the chain. Whenever you fail an athletics or acrobatics check while climbing while using these daggers, you may, as a reaction, make a dexterity or strength saving throw. On a success, you prevent yourself from falling more than 30 feet. You may also, as an action, cause the chains to shrink rapidly, pulling yourself to where the daggers were previously set while climbing. Additionally, you can, as a reaction to hitting or missing a thrown attack with these weapons, cause the chain to shrink, returning both daggers to your hands. Proficiency with a dagger allows you to add your proficiency bonus to the attack roll for any attack you make with this weapon. As you can see, this item fulfills a very similar role to the blink dagger, or the idea of the blink dagger being a weapon that you can throw and have immediately teleport back to you. But I wanted to give it a little more of a bound limiter, as I wanted to make it weak enough to be more so affordable and interesting to the party. I also really wanted to give it some design philosophy. Why was someone making this dagger on a chain that's able to grow and shrink? And so that's where I kind of came across this idea of making something that's like a climbing implement, that its design is about allowing you to climb and stretching out or shrinking to bring you up or allow you to drift down from where a dagger is set, but that people have learned how to use in combat as sort of a whipping action that's making use of a previous feature in sort of a new way. So those two items are more of an example of me trying to make something that's normally very expensive or very high-leveled a bit more attainable, and a couple of methods you can go about bringing down kind of the power level of certain magic items, especially when you're working with a party at a lower level. Either making a consumable version or adding some interesting purpose limits to the item, meaning it's something that they can try to get the result they're looking for, but wasn't initially intended that way. which I think kind of lends itself to a very interesting moment of discovery for the players. After making something more accessible, one of my favorite reasons to be making magic items and adding them into the world is about adding a level of history or lore to your world. Items with deeper or older purposes that are still used, but just hold on to this air of there's something about this that tells me a bit about the world before this point. And for that, the two items I want to talk about are first a penance ring, or the Caliph's Ire. Now, this magic item is rare in that it comes from only a single country within my world. It is a simple copper ring, shaped in the style of a 16-sided symbol of Baron Verdun. This item is cursed. Attuning to it curses you until you are targeted by a remove curse spell, or when a family member of the original creator dispels the magic on the ring. Once worn, the wearer becomes horribly disfigured, developing cracked, splitting skin, dry, open wounds, and discoloration across their body. This transformation causes no physical pain to the wearer, nor does it affect their physical abilities. Once cursed, the ring cannot be removed from the finger, unless the finger is severed, though this does not remove the curse of the ring. This is a magic item that you don't want to uninformedly give to your players. In fact, most cursed items you don't want to just drop on your players with permanent consequences without at least some level of lore warning, especially because the Identify spell, which is a party's chief tool for looking at magic items, won't reveal curses and is in fact by raw supposed to be unable to identify if an item is cursed. Instead, how this ring was actually presented to the party was with full information. Now, obviously, this is an item you don't want to be equipping yourself, as its only attribute is this curse of basic physical disfigurement. However, it starts to give an idea or paint a picture of what the location of Baron Verdun is like, or at least was like in the past. What do you imagine a country is like that in its past had a large collection of cursed rings meant to permanently mark people that could only be undone by their creators? Were these gifts? Were these punishments? This is an item I really love in its ability to kind of raise some questions about a location and about why something might exist. Now, the other one, which also has a very interesting name, is called the Blade of Remorse. Now, first thing to discuss about the Blade of Remorse is I partly stole the idea of vestiges when making this. For anybody who doesn't know, vestiges were kind of a magic item concept brought forth by one Matt Mercer, the DM who is in charge of the show Critical Role. And I had to agree with him when he talked about the idea of having magic items that grow with the party, like when they fulfill conditions as they're leveling up, but a magic item that a party becomes attached to, and so is able to almost level up and grow in power with them. There's something about growing attached to an item because of what it's done for you, but just having to cast it aside when a new item comes up with a bigger plus bonus to it. Of course, vestiges are supposed to be very powerful. And so the magic items I make that end up becoming vestiges tend to become themselves very powerful towards their end, but also tend to be where I focus a lot of storytelling and just how they level up. The Blade of Remorse is a silvery blade with a dark purple stone handle. Wrapped in tattered cloth for grip, this blade holds a deep well of sadness to it. In its dormant state, you have a +1 bonus to attack and damage rolls made with this magic weapon. This item is found with 2d4 counters. It recovers 2 counters for each drink drunk before dawn. As a bonus action, you may spend a counter to gain immunity to one effect of drunkenness. When used, you lose any previous immunities granted by this feature. Now, before we go into the other states, I made this weapon both to reflect a character from one of my players' backstories. Someone who had a mysterious past that had led them to make poor decisions. Even just by looking at it, the weapon is described as holding some sort of well of sadness, and its name as a Blade of Remorse brings up a lot of imagery or ideas. So that once you read into its dormant state and see that this weapon is based around drinking and gaining immunity to some effects of being drunk, starts to paint the image, I believe. Tells the story of what the previous owner or what the maker of this weapon was like, or what they were going through. And that message comes out, I hope, more so as it becomes awakened and then exalted. When the blade reaches an awakened state, it gains the following properties. The weapon's bonus to attack rolls and damage increase to +2. You become immune to the poisoned effect caused by alcohol. When you hit an enemy with an attack, you may use your reaction to spend 4 counters. When you do, you may roll a number of hit die up to your proficiency. You then add that much psychic damage to your attack and take half that total yourself. In a flash, both you and the target glimpse a horrid memory of your pasts. All the emotions and feelings rush back with no restraint. Remember what you did. Never forget it. Use that pain. Handle those memories until they aren't as sharp. If you can do this, your guilt won't hurt you as much. When this blade reaches an exalted state, it gains the following properties. The weapon's bonus to attack rolls and damage increase to +3. While holding this weapon, you possess the memory effects of the Keen Mind feature. As a bonus action, you may spend a counter to mark a person that you can see. While marked, you maintain perfect memory of each of their actions and reactions. They, however, can no longer maintain a full, clear memory of your actions or reactions, causing the following effects. You gain advantage on all attack rolls against your marked target. Your marked target has disadvantage on all attack rolls, saving throws, and ability checks caused by you. Your marked target cannot accurately describe you if they had only seen you while marked. Your marked target cannot accurately remember what you did for that time that you were marked. You maintain a perfect memory of all actions your marked target has done, while any one of your senses can detect them. This perfect recollection includes all of your senses, even if multiple of them could not have possibly detected those actions. And finally, you unlock the Reservoir of Remorse. As an action, you may spend 8 counters to entirely blur yourself from your marked target's memories. The target makes a wisdom saving throw DC of 20. On a success, the person will be unable to fully recall your appearance, name, or actions in its past, but may make future saves whenever they are prompted about these memories. On a fail, the person will fully forget you as a person in their past. They will completely forget your appearance, name, and actions, and no amount of prompting can cause these memories to stir. Depending on the amount of memories blurred, the person can begin to substitute strangers or mysterious hidden figures into their memories, or may be left with a deep confusion about their own past. When encountering you in the future, the person may be left with a vague sense of déjà vu, but nothing more. On use of this feature, the user will gain the memories of the 5 minutes before this feature was last used. Additionally, this item will return to its dormant state, become unattuned to its current user, and will never be attuned to that user again. This here is obviously an item I spent a lot of time building. It's something I wanted to make integral to an NPC's past. Something that, through its features and nothing else, hints at what the person was like, what they encountered, and why they had this implement with them. Most interestingly, whenever I make something like this, something that goes through many stages, I almost always make sure to include a feature in it that is very powerful, but causes the item to return to its dormant state. Basically, an explanation for how this item can be found in a locked up manner, unpossessed by someone who would have had great power while wielding it. And that are the two items I wanted to talk about for how I'd like to add history or lore through magic items. Being able to think of an item that builds up a character or makes up an important part of their past, something that you can see NPC or even one of your player characters making big story decisions around, is something that will almost always give a strong sense of lore, experience in a living world. Now, that does lead us directly into another major reason I have for making magic items, and this is explaining a character's abilities. Now, this isn't something that is ever really necessary in a game. A lot of monsters that have nearly impossible or magical abilities are simply because they are magical or have magical influence on the world around them. However, in my current campaign, at least currently, I have been focusing a lot on humanoid enemies and antagonists. And so if you want to make those enemies and antagonists a little more fantastical, one of my favorite methods for bringing power to an enemy is actually through magic items. The reason being is, at least to me, it kind of lends a little more of a level of legitimacy to a character's power. Being able to say, no, I'm not putting you against a person that is simply higher level than you, or that I've given features so they have features to contend with a full party, but because they have worked to gather or create magic items to give them more power. Of course, this also then plays into a fun level of progression for your party, where if you have them fighting enemies that have equipped themselves with magic items to make themselves more powerful, more of a contention for the party, that does mean these magic items are both stealable and lootable should they win. And there's something about being able to beat an enemy and take claim to some small part of the powers they exhibited, that is, at least in my opinion, super rewarding as a player. Being able to beat a magical enemy who was using a very powerful item that you then get to use and incorporate. Lessons from the exalted tardigrade. Well, thank you for calling me exalted. I do hope everyone understands my +3 prowess. But yes, making these items and allowing your players to actually face enemies and grow in power from that defeat without having to level up, but by claiming what was theirs, is, I think, a very fun area to be in. And so the two weapons we're going to be talking about are called the Sethic Great Blade and some items of the Quickling. So the Sethic Great Blade was an item that my party actually encountered already and have won in a fight. There was an enemy that was holding this dark greatsword forged from a strange Damascus steel. Veins of dark green ran through the steel, and in certain lights appeared to glow. Multiple green quartz-like crystals seemed to grow from the hilt along the flat of the blade. While wielding this weapon, you may spend a counter to cast any of its listed spells without paying any component cost at a DC 15. The green flame blade, sword burst, or hellish rebuke, which can be cast at your proficiency -1. You regain 1 counter when one of the following occurs. You slay a humanoid creature with this weapon or one of its effects. You become bloodied. Whenever you make a short rest, you may choose to sacrifice any number of hit die to regain that many counters. Now, this item was being wielded by a sort of leader of a bandit group that the party had discovered. But I wanted this man to be able to dish out some magic at the party while still being able to survive in close melee combat for a bit. So I wanted to basically create a very basic type of bandit captain enemy, but give them a real explanation for their powers beyond they are a wizard, they are a warlock, and sort of put it in this realm of an item so that not only is there a reason for their power, but also a way for the party to claim that power. For when you see someone wielding around a green glowing blade, casting fire, causing bursts of crystals around them, it's much more rewarding, in my opinion, to make claim of that power yourself in victory than just saying, and we have defeated the warlock. The other items are actually a group of items, and I won't be going through all of them. But they include the blade of the Quickling, the boots of the Quickling, and I believe the cloak of the Quickling's cloak. Now, these are all very powerful magic items that I put on an NPC who is very dedicated to a school of martial teaching called the School of the Quickling. He was not really supposed to be someone the party would challenge to a fight, and they ended up avoiding a fight with him. But I gave him a set of items that would make him an absolute terror on the battlefield. I wanted this character to be someone who was absurdly fast, nearly impossible to pin down or hit, and as a fight dragged on and on, he would only increase in speed and power over time. So all of these items were meant to work together to explain how a normal humanoid elf is able to exceed the limits of normal classes. The Quickling's cloak was a chief item for this. A gray cloak made of strange, softened leather. It seems to move erratically with the wind and leave a soft, silvery trail that grows blurred and gray as the wearer moves. While equipped, you gain a +2 to your AC. You gain advantage on all dexterity saving throws. And if You end your turn having moved your full movement speed and without taking the dodge action. All attack rolls have disadvantage against you until the start of your next turn. Now, this item helps explain how the character I had was able to move quickly while leaving the strange trail behind them. Part of how they're able to dodge and weave at an unnatural way compared to other elves should be able to. And also presents itself as a reason for a party to consider challenging someone that appears impossible for them to defeat. If the party starts to get the idea that a lot of powerful enemies have magic items on them that they can claim, that going out and defeating a powerful enemy is going to not just give them XP to try to increase their strength, but might actually provide them with resources beyond gold or experience, you could start to see your players start to really think about, why is this person powerful? And are they powerful in a way that I want to challenge to see if I can actually grow to encompass it myself? I can't, I guess, 100% say why, but there's something about drawing your players into this thought pattern of, okay, this is a person. They're so strong probably because of items. Can we gain their powers if we're able to steal or defeat them for those items? That I think just is so much more interesting than if we defeat enough of these enemy, we should be able to level up and gain gold to go out and purchase items or just gain our base features. Moving on then from explaining characters' abilities is creating items for your players, for specific things they're building towards. Now, this can be something like, sometimes players are simply working towards building an actual magic item. Like they have been working over time to try to create an item that they can make use of, that they are going to be building towards a specific end. That is always a great reason to be working with your players to be homebrewing an item, though oftentimes they will be providing you with information about what they want it to do. Another important thing as a DM, though, is to be watching how your players are playing, what they want to be doing, and how you can help them achieve that through making small alterations to magic items that actually play into their specific desired style. And for that, I'm going to be talking about 2 items, one of which is called the Elven's Fighting Whip. I can find it. Yeah, the Elven Fighter's Whip. So in my party, I have a character who is a fighter who's trying to make use of dual wielding a whip and a crossbow. Now, this build has some big disadvantages to it in that it's pretty low damage output for all the actions that get spent on it, but really is something the player is doing to kind of build a very interesting character. And just the visualization of this stocky dwarf whipping outward, like how he imagined his build would play. So here we have the Elven Fighter's Whip. Whenever you roll a superiority die, you may add a +1 to the roll. Whenever you hit using a disarming strike maneuver, you may roll an opposed strength check with the opponent. On a success, you may drop the item anywhere in range of yourself. On a fail, it falls to the enemy's feet. Whenever you hit with a melee attack with this weapon, you may use a bonus action to cause the whip to coil unnaturally around the target, restraining or lassoing it. The target must succeed a strength saving throw of 10 + 1, which is the weapon's magic bonus, plus your proficiency modifier, or be restrained by the whip. A large or larger creature has advantage on this saving throw. And then at the end, I just added in a little detail breaking down the restrained. So this, you could see, can be a very powerful weapon at times. Something that really more so was meant to help a player who had an idea of what they wanted their build to do eventually reach that with an item that sort of shifted everything a little more in that direction. You do want to be careful when making very specific magic items, of course, because there's always the threat of making things a little too finessey, meaning there's too many conditions you have to consider. There's a sense of just building an item to be the perfect match for a player, which can be really good feeling, but may have some issues with balance later on. And so it's always something to consider when you're making magic items, to be checking with existing items, existing features, and make sure you're not making an item that fulfills several other items' jobs at once, unless it is rare enough or expensive enough to match that desire. However, also making sure that you work to make items that eventually directly benefit your players' playstyles is something that I think is rewarding as a DM, just to kind of get better into your players' heads and how they want to be fighting combat or performing certain actions, but also as eventual strong rewards or even ideas to give to them when they go about trying to custom make or custom order a magic item. If you already have stuff in mind for when someone says, I want to make something to just really elevate my character, I've got cash to burn, I want to customize something, being able to present to them something you've been working on from the beginning to play into their style can be very helpful. After that, then, the final kind of group of magic items, or making magic items, I wanted to talk about was when you as a DM is simply having too much fun making magic items, or too much fun introducing possible properties or combinations to your players. This is definitely the most dangerous but most attractive area to get drawn into. And the two items, or two groups of items I want to be talking about here are, first, a fun little magic item I made called a Delver Stone. And second, is going into the list of custom magical drugs I have made to give to my party. Yes, we're going to be talking about some very interesting consumables once we tell the story of the Delver Stone. The Delver Stone is a pale imitation of the Ioun Stone. These magic stones are gifted with a series of simple enchantments, allowing them to operate as wondrously useful objects. Their frequent confusion for and comparison to the Ioun Stone, however, leads them to be likened to fool's gold. By attuning to this item, if it had no counters on it, it gains one counter. If the stone runs out of counters, it immediately becomes unattuned to you. When you use an action to toss one of these stones into the air, the stone orbits your head at a distance of 1 foot. Thereafter, another creature must use an action to grasp or net the stone to separate it from you, either by making a successful attack roll against an AC of 21, or a successful DC 21 Dexterity Acrobatics check. You can use an action to seize and stow the stone, ending its effect. The stone has an AC of 21, 10 hit points, and resistance to all damage. It is considered to be an object that is being worn while it orbits your head. While being worn, you may spend an action to have the stone perform one of the following. Begin to glow with a soft yellow light, providing a bright light for 15 feet and a dim light for another 20. Emit a beam of light in a 30-foot cone. Reveal which way is north. Reveal what hour of the day it is. Return to your possession, the stone will return itself to you as directed. You may also spend one counter to absorb the magic in the stone, granting 1d6 plus 1 temporary hit points. Finally, you may spend one counter to send the stone hurtling at a target within 30 feet, causing them to make a DC 18 saving throw. On a failure, they take 2 magical bludgeoning damage and are distracted by the stone, granting them disadvantage on their next attack roll and advantage on the next attack roll against them. On a success, they take no damage and only gain disadvantage on their next attack roll. Now, this was a fun little magic item that I made to be a bit of a multi-purpose tool, I suppose. Something that is uncommon, that fulfills the slot of having several common items, such as the Orb of Time Telling, the Orb of Direction, an ever-burning lantern. I wanted to make kind of an expensive magic item that is just one item, does all of it, don't worry. But also, when I made this item, I had just finished reading up on a very powerful magic item called the Ioun Stone that can do anything from granting a +2 to AC to giving you additional attacks or resistances. And I was just tickled pink at the concept of a mage in the world encountering the Ioun Stone and saying, I can make one myself. And putting all of their skill, all of their time into making a powerful magic item that just isn't quite up to snuff of that of a real archmage. An item that is trying its best, made by a man who is simply not the greatest in the world, trying to make something amazing. The Delver Stone existed in my mind as a funny joke item that is very useful until you learn about other magic items, essentially. Its main job is to highlight how powerful certain magic items can be, and how hard it can be to actually craft a very powerful item. Now then, we get to move on to the final group we'll be discussing. Some fun bits that I call my magical drugs. Now then, this it is too OP for its own good. Agreed, Lotus. Agreed. So now we will be discussing something that came into my world for a couple of reasons. A, I can never resist offering people power in exchange for sacrifice. I have the mentality of a hag, I believe in that way. But also in my world, there's a large amount of black market, underground dealing, trade, and the like, where many worlds I think tend to have. And I wanted to have some interesting, powerful, but dangerous consumables for a party to mess around with. And my 3 chief examples are Ludden, Orbmead, and Zolflex. All 3 of which are very powerful, very dangerous, and were made to fulfill their own little purpose. Ludden. Once taken, you gain the benefits of a short rest, and are affected by Ludden High for 1 hour. Ludden is, I suppose in a way, an equivalent of a very strong upper meant to be smoked. For 1 hour, you may choose one exhaustion effect to ignore for the duration of this high. If you take a short rest while under the effects, you benefit from a long rest, except you do not regain hit die. This ignores the usual 1 long rest a day rule. If you fall unconscious while under the effects of the Ludden High, you are unconscious for 1 hour, at the end of which you gain 1 point of exhaustion. At the end of Ludden High, you gain 1 point of exhaustion. Additionally, you cannot benefit from a short rest until a long rest is taken. Ludden is an oh fuck emergency smoke. Something that can give a lot of short rest based classes all of their features back. Whether it be a monk, a warlock, or a fighter, being able to go into a fight having just spent all of your key points or your action surge and getting them back when facing a boss or a challenge you weren't ready for can be absolutely life-saving. However, it also comes with its own threats. Being able to grant you points of exhaustion, which are notoriously hard to get rid of, and if you fall unconscious under its effects, gaining multiple points. This was meant to be sort of a combat risk-reward drug. The next one, however, was more so meant for social or personal exploration. Orb mead. Hey, you guys know you're not allowed to have jewels during class. Gorgo, bring that up here. No, you're not allowed to have that in school. Give that to me. You'll get it back at the end of class, though I will be wanting to call your mom about this. Hey, listen. There's not much more of class left. Yes, you can only smoke if you brought enough jewels for everyone. Alright. No, lunch isn't for another 20 minutes. Okay. Okay. We've got 2 more drugs to get through. Once we're done talking about drugs, I'll open up to open questions. People can go to the bathroom, have lunch, whatever they need. Next, we're talking about orb mead. You are under the effects of orb high for 10 minutes. While affected, you have expertise in all int and wisdom skills. While affected, your initiative is decreased by -5, and your movement speed is decreased by 10 to a minimum of 5. You may choose to fall unconscious at any time. If you fall unconscious while under the effects of Orb High, you must make a DC 15 Wisdom check. On a fail, you take 3d6 psychic damage and fall unconscious for 1 hour, during which time you will relive a random memory from your past in perfect detail. This memory will often be tied to strong emotions. On a successful save, you take half damage and can select the memory you wish to recollect. At the end of this time, you gain 1 point of exhaustion. So Orb Mead, I made in direct counter to Ludden. An item more useful out of combat. Gaining expertise and 6 skills on use is something that can be very powerful, whether you're researching something, searching for something, or just need any of your int or wisdom skills to be on point. In fact, this drug is very dangerous in combat as it greatly decreases your initiative and your movement speed. But the most interesting effect it provides is the ability for characters to go back to their memories, to explore either dark memories or simply things that they are having a hard time fully recollecting. And sometimes you have players in your party who have been playing around with amnesia storylines, and giving them a method for fully exploring their past in that case can be very exciting. Now then, if we may, we will move on to my final drug, after which we'll be opening everything up for discussions and questions. Now, the most dangerous of my available magical drugs and the most magical in design and purpose is, hey, Gremlin Hunter, what's that note? You know the rules. You're going to have to read it out loud. Floating list. Hand that here. Give me the note. Give me the note, floating list. All right. Well, I'm going to just be reading this out loud. Oh. we'll just finish with Zolflex then. You all clearly need recess. You are under the effects of Zolhai for 1 minute. While affected, all cantrips can be cast for a bonus action. This allows you to cast any 2 cantrips a turn. While affected, whenever you use a spell slot to cast a known spell, you may choose to treat that slot as if it was 1 spell level higher. The spell must be known to you, and the initial spell slot must be of a high enough level to be cast without this effect. Whenever you cast a spell and the target saves, you may make them roll 2d4 and subtract that from their save. Whenever you can cast a spell, you take a DC 15 Constitution save. On a fail, you take 1d6 necrotic damage per spell level. Cantrips deal 1 necrotic damage. If you fall unconscious while affected by this high, you are unconscious for 1 hour, at the end of which you gain 1 exhaustion and lose all remaining spell slots. You cannot regain spell slots until after your next long rest, meaning it will take 2 long rests before your spell slots return. If you are reduced to 0 hit points by any of this drug's damages, you are afflicted with the disease Zol Plague. Zol Plague. Whenever the afflicted casts a spell, they must make a con save of 15. On a fail, they take 1d6 necrotic damage per spell level and lose an additional spell slot of their choice. On a success, they take half damage and lose no additional spell slot. Zolflex is one of my proudest drug creations. Something horribly gnarly, yet very powerful. Being able to cast 2 spells a turn when you count your cantrips, and being able to elevate your spells to a level beyond what they should be, are very rewarding in combat, and something that's very hard to turn down, though the risks are also very high. Losing hit points, and being threatened with one of my more horrific homebrew diseases. Zolflex is a very dangerous and powerful magical drug that I, of course, created entirely because I was having far too much fun making drugs for my players. And with that, we've talked about all the major areas I consider when I'm going around making my own homebrew items. Trying to make features more accessible, adding history and lore to the world, explaining how different characters have special abilities, building to reward your players in kind of the strange builds they're working towards, and also just having a bit too much fun building stuff. So, right now, I would like to open things up for people to go to recess, have lunch, go to the bathroom, and if you're so inclined to stay in class, ask any questions about how I make magic items. Are there any of these you would like me to explain in more detail, or any types of magic items you'd like to see if I made something around? Also, if anyone here's got any great homebrew item stories they want to tell, this is very much the point where I'd like to be hearing from that. Once we get through kind of this questions, ideas, and quick story time, next we will be moving on to telling the story of session 2 and 3 from my campaign. So, everyone, take your time. Ask your questions, share ideas, and please, if anyone's got any great stories, I'd love to hear them. For people who might want to look through and see if there's any magic items you'd actually like to take a closer look at, I know my descriptions can get a little wordy, so I don't want to force our way through the entire list, but I've got a few here that are quite interesting. Some of which I've talked about, some of which I haven't. But if any names catch your attention, or if anybody out there's got anything they want to know about, We are open for questions. And maybe even beyond that. How's everybody doing? Are y'all enjoying the story time, learning about how I make magic items, or just hearing some of my magical items ideas? I remember last session or last stream that I had, people were super interested in kind of looking at some of the bits and baubles I had made for my world, and I sure hope these help to kind of paint a picture of it. I'm enjoying it. Listening while doing some notes, trying to see how DMing goes. Okay. Are you setting up to do your own DM session then? You got a campaign you're running? Floating list? Ah. This is my first stream and I'm enjoying it. Oh, I'm glad to hear that, Wood Bogus. I'm sorry you weren't able to make it to my last D&D stream. The VOD should be up. Is anybody able to say whether the VOD is still up or not? And if not, I currently have it downloaded and I'm working to archive it if you're interested. My last stream, I really talked about how I go about homebrewing a world. And I went through a lot of lore about kind of my current campaign that I've built. So honestly, I highly recommend it if you're looking into homebrewing stuff or just enjoy hearing a lot of D&D stories. Though, of course, it is a longer stream, so I understand not wanting to sit through a few hours of a VOD. Let's hear. No, just still trying to learn how things go. I still need to actually play D&D. Let me check. Yeah, it's still there. Okay, cool. Thanks, Loading List. Yeah, so I still have my old VOD up and available for anybody interested in seeing more so on how I do the lore side of things. Though I'm already planning on my next stream being maybe a little more lore focused or maybe a little more homebrew focused. We'll put up a poll at the end of this stream to see kind of what everybody watching would like to see next time. Though it seems like we don't have a lot of magic item questions or comments coming up right now. I'll give another couple of minutes for anybody maybe typing stuff out. But also, if people are more interested, after that couple of minutes, I'll move on to telling the next stories from my campaign. Hmm. How's everybody doing? Everybody having a good weekend? Thank you all for indulging me and letting me just tell stories about DMing and building stuff. We need an animated fireplace for future story times. Fair enough, though I tend to have a lot of fun looking at different maps and features, though I suppose with a lot of my campaigns I don't have any of those maps unarchived anymore. So it might be fair to go look up a fireplace at one point. In fact, how am I doing? I'm doing good. I'm excited because I get to have my next D&D session tomorrow, and the party is going to be faced with some very interesting choices. Just have a little love seat for your tardigrade. All right. All right. I'll look into setting something up. Have a little armchair and a fireplace for your guy just in the corner. Okay. I'll see what I can do about finding that. I don't know if I'll be able to find something decent that isn't like really owned by someone. But if everybody's really wanting the tardigrade to have a nice little fireplace, I'll see about getting that set up before next weekend. But with that, it looks like we're excited to go into the campaign. So, during my last stream, I talked about how the party coalesced. A group of an Aarakocra cleric named Pharaoh, Milo, the halfling bard, Tortuga, a monk elf, and Rasmussen, a dwarven fighter, and finally Malachite, a Genasi ranger. They'd come in as three different groups. Malachite and Rasmussen being hired by Pulamont to explore the city of Scarin for their future advancements. Pharaoh and Milo simply traveling south to move away from a war going on in Tverfia. And Tortuga brought here on his own mysterious means. They'd all been collected together and had gone into the woods and done a bit of hunting, as they were told there'd be good gold to be made by the mayor of this town. However, upon returning, they learned from a butcher that the mayor was in fact offering far too much, and that if they had dealt with him, many people in town would likely be irritated with them taking advantage of their idiot of a mayor. So the party chose to essentially tell the mayor to fuck himself and sell their goods to locals, making less profit but avoiding any real social danger. Having done their first job together and made a bit of coin, the group then decided to all get rooms at the same tavern together, have dinner, and maybe learn a bit about each other. They settled down at a small local place owned by a woman named Fea, an older woman who was running this place on her own. While hanging out and having dinner together, they met Fea's daughter, Dea, a young woman and a local herbalist, someone who kind of acted as a doctor and herb provider for much of the city district they were currently in. She introduced herself to them and learned a bit about them, offering, if they were interested, a bit of work in the morning, helping her set up her shop, make a few medicines, and then doing a few house calls. Now, Rasmussen, being very dwarvish in demeanor, felt very little need to wake up early in the morning to do a quick job of helping someone set up. However, Pharaoh, Malachite, and Milo all found this woman to be very nice and wished to help her with her job. So the next morning, the party had split, Rasmussen and Tortuga staying at the tavern and learning a bit about each other, while Pharaoh, Milo, and Malachite ventured out to Dea's herbalism shop and helped her set up for the morning, and ventured out with her to make a few house calls. Along this journey, Milo ended up being a big help, offering up a couple of spell slots to help heal a few injured of the town, though one of which was suffering more from a disease that could not be cured through magic in this case. He worked hard to make sure the man's suffering was greatly reduced for a period of time. However, it was at their last house that the party encountered something very unfortunate. Small family had been living here. As they knocked on the door, they seemed unwilling to answer it, in fact yelling them away. But Dea and the party members with her eventually were able to make their way in and discover that the young boy, the son of this family, had been stolen away in the night due to debts that the father had owed to a local crime ring. His arm had been broken, and his son, a young boy of about 7 or 8, had been stolen away. Dea did not know what she could do to help. But Milo, Malachite, and Pharaoh quickly offered up to find this boy. Milo reassuring the family that he would do everything in his power to find their son and bring him back safely, as Malachite immediately set in to trying to track the assailants. While the concept of trying to track some individuals within an entire city can seem daunting at times, Scarin, or at least this district of Scarin, does work with dirt roads. And most luckily for her, the men who had barged in wore a very unique type of shoe. a hobnailed boot, something similar to metal cleats, mostly used for men using rough work or those knowing they'll be doing a lot of kicking at some point in the day. Following the trail, it took them to a large warehouse. The party then observed this warehouse for a time. While watching it, they saw many workers moving about, all of which seemed strong, rough, and armed with clubs, several of which also wore the hobnailed boots they had been tracking. After spending a time watching this warehouse, the party saw no sign of the boy. They were certain that this was the first place he was brought. The party would then fully reconvene with the members who had remained at the tavern and explain to them what had happened. That a local family had lost their son to some hooligans who had stolen him away, and that they had tracked them down to a local warehouse. Rasmussen responded with, "Well, did they offer any money to find him?" Of course not. This family was poor and already deeply in debt. Rasmussen didn't wish to leave the boy in danger, but only begrudgingly agreed, seeing very little to gain from going about this business. So the party then collected and decided to form some plan. They went back and questioned the family about why the son was taken, who they had made deals with, how much debt had they accrued, and where were these discussions had. They learned that the warehouse was owned and operated by a local named Gabriel, a very rough man who worked himself up from being a worker at a different warehouse to eventually own and operate his own. It was a well-kept secret within the poorer districts that if you were in desperate need of money, you could make a deal at his warehouse, or at least out back of it, for a loan, though the percentages were high, and the consequences for not paying even higher. The father would then explain to the party that he had made a deal with Gabriel's right-hand man, a tiefling named Gale, who dressed in the style of a Scarpy raider, or at least of one of their exiles called the Upvakni. While we at this time don't know a ton about the Scarpy, it'd be best to describe them as being very Viking-based or inspired. The Upvakni are known as the exiles of that land, people who were considered rule breakers amongst a raiding community. They're known to be very dangerous, though also simple at times. Now knowing the names and at least the descriptions of one of the men they would be looking for, the party returned to the warehouse late at night to try to give some observation about what happens during closing and when night falls. Watching the warehouse, they saw it close up. They watched as the two men they figured to be Gale and Gabriel left, along with all the workers, leaving the place locked up but without any actual guards present. They thought it a long shot. Why would they leave a boy unattended here? But perhaps there was some place they stored people or some record of debt. So the party decided they would try to sneak in to the warehouse. Going to the doors, they found them all to be chained and locked, and with no key on hand, the option of breaking through seemed slim. And with no rogue on hand, the option of picking the locks even slimmer. Taking their time to circle the place, though, they did notice at the top, where the ceiling met the very top of the walls, were a series of open slatted windows meant to simply allow light into the warehouse. With no glass covering, no barring on them at all, this seemed like the perfect way to break in. The first step was getting Pharaoh to fly up a cord to one of the windows. She then took a 50-foot rope and flew up to the roof and slowly fed a rope through, tying it off along one of the windowsills. Now anyone in the party would be able to make quick work up and in, though of course they'd want someone on guard. First up was the monk Tortuga. He made quick work of climbing the rope and began to peer in through the window. When out of the corner of his eye, a reflective glint was caught. It seemed some sort of copper wiring had been placed along the windowsill. This made him immediately nervous. So he climbed back down and approached Milo, the party's bard and most obvious spellcaster, and asked Milo if he had any idea what something like that could be. Milo racked his mind and figured out that this was most likely an alarm spell cast on the wire, and that anything crossing over it could alert the caster that someone had entered in. The party debated their possibilities and decided that most likely, this late at night, even if one man was alerted that someone had gone through the window, it would likely take them a great deal of time to get down here. So if the party could get in and out very quickly, or with a bit of luck find the boy, they would have full reason to be within this warehouse. So, the party split into two groups. Those who would break in, which included Tortuga, Rasmussen, and Malachite, and those who would remain on watch, Pharaoh on the roof and Milo on the ground. They quickly made note that every half an hour or so, guards would pass by this area. So they knew they had a good window to get in, and as long as they were quiet, it would be unlikely to be spotted. Breaking into the warehouse was easy. Tortuga, Rasmussen, and Malachite made their way down without much issue. They did a quick look of the shelves, but they were loaded up with not very interesting items. Seemed storing of old rusted farming tools, flour, supplies. There were some closed crates and barrels that might be interesting, but it would take too long to search this entire place top to bottom to know what was valuable. And besides, they weren't here to rob the place. Proceeding through the place slowly, the party eventually found the upstairs office, set up on a loft. However, this door was also locked. Though, with it being out of sight of the street, Malachite made the simple choice of breaking through. Repetitively, she smashed herself into the doorframe, slowly wrenching the hinges away from the wood and eventually splitting the door in half. They had been lucky to time this when guards had not been passing, though still quite a bit of noise was made, making both Milo and Pharaoh outside very nervous. Proceeding into the office, they searched the place and were able to find a chest where inside there was a small bag of gold, a few writing supplies, but most importantly, a ledger of everything stored in the warehouse, with specialty notes made of certain shelves and items. Giving a quick glance, the party very soon realized that this ledger had a great amount of code written into it, that there was hidden information here, that likely something seedy was happening, but they would need a lot of time to read through the code and try to figure out what everything meant. Unfortunately for them, this was now the time that the guards were making their way back. It seems they had not been quite out of earshot of the door being shattered to pieces, nor of the sound that Rasmussen had made while trying to climb one of the shelves to leave the warehouse, as he knocked a crate full of copper-headed clubs off the shelf. Guards heard this sound and began approaching the warehouse. and on approach they saw the silhouette of a large winged figure on the roof, and began shouting out, "Who goes there? Why are you on the roof? Is someone inside?" Acting quickly, Milo then approached the group and began to explain that his friend on the roof had that she had gotten drunk and that he was trying to get her down himself, but she seemed to be a bit unsurly at the time. Approaching, however, the guards saw the rope tied to the window and seized Milo and yelled up to Pharaoh to come down now. Glancing out the back of the warehouse, though, Pharaoh saw Tortuga, Malachite, and finally Rasmussen, with a couple of looted weapons in hand, jump from the back window and crash into the ground. She took this as her cue and took flight, leaving the scene as quickly as possible with the rest of the party, leaving Milo in the hands of the guards, who had many, many questions for him. And that was the end of the second session. The party has just found that a young boy had been taken by the city's underground, stolen away, it seemed, to cover debts. They had found the place where most likely these men were operating from, but without any solid evidence inside beside this untranslated journal, they could hardly figure out what was happening. And most unfortunately, Milo was the one caught when they were making noise during their break-in. Session 3 thus began with Milo in chains brought into the guards' barracks, while the rest of the party spent a sleepless night at the tavern, wondering what they could possibly do to try and break Milo free. While in the guards' barracks, Milo was brought before a man simply called himself Fox, an older guard that seems to have spent his entire life in Scarin, having the classic silver band around his temples of a middle-aged man. He questioned Milo about why he had been breaking into this warehouse, why he and his friends had stolen from it, and what was happening. Milo thus tried to explain that he believed that unsavory figures were acting from this warehouse, that he believed people might be getting kidnapped or worse, sold to slavery through it, that they were definitely operating as an illegal lending and borrowing system and punishing people who failed to fully fulfill their debts. Fox was a very shrewd man, and after looking deep into Milo's eyes, he found him not to be lying. Fox didn't fully know the truth of what was happening. After all, the man Gabriel had been a local for a long time, and while not the greatest of men, had never done something so far blown. So he was invited into the guards' place as well, or rather, taken in by a few guards who had been sent down to the warehouse for questioning. Gabriel was thus also brought before Fox, who had a few questions for him. Gabriel, though, said that he, of course, would not have done any of this, and that he was simply looking for this man who had broken into his place to return what was stolen and to pay for the repairs to his door and his office space. As Milo did not know about the stolen ledger and could not bring forth any real evidence, ultimately, he was placed with a charge for returning what was stolen and paying for the man's repairs. And Milo was told he would not be allowed to leave the city until such time as that could be done. The first to leave was Gabriel, and then Milo. Now, as he left, Fox was left with many questions to consider about what may or may not be happening right now within his city. Returning to the party, Milo would explain that he had been taken in and had tried to explain everything to the guard captain, but that ultimately he had had no real evidence to bring before them, and that unless the family was willing to talk, likely Fox would be unable to do anything. But the party had very good news for Milo in the ledger that they had stolen. They had been working on trying to puzzle out what some of the phrases and codes in it meant. They kept coming across the word Vader fish. Not a type of fish they were familiar with. In fact, one of them recognized Vader as a word used by Scarpy. It seems to them that likely what everything referred to here as barrels of fish were in fact people being stolen and most likely sold into slavery. They began trying to puzzle out as much as they could from this note. They found references to dry-pressed flowers, dry-pressed pine, dry-pressed... They couldn't quite put everything together. There was too much here. And unfortunately for them, they were only able to copy down half of the ledger before the guards came in. Turns out Milo had been followed from the guard captain's place, as they suspected he would return to his friends. And after doing so, the guards came in and demanded the return of all of Gabriel's items. Without reason to hold them and without fully having the evidence of Vader fish being references to slavery, the party unfortunately had to hand the ledger over with only half of it copied down. Thus, they had hints and ideas of what was happening here. They could not figure out where the people were being stored. They did not know what everything in that ledger had referenced. And now they knew that the guards weren't entirely on their side, and that Gabriel knew someone was onto them. They were in a pinch and needed to get answers quickly. So the party began splitting up looking for evidence, exploring different locations, and trying to find one of the warehouse workers to see if they could question him a bit more thoroughly about what was happening. First off on her own was Pharaoh. She would go to the warehouse itself and wait till she could find and isolate the man named Gale. She found him quickly enough, seeing as he has a very unique look. A maroon tiefling, bearing no horns at all, nor the fractured remnants of where a horn would have been broken. He strode about with a brand, or really a tattoo, set into his chest, something that would mark him as being of the Upvakni, or exiles from the raiding communities. Pharaoh would approach him and ask him a very interesting question, one she figured would not so much raise his suspicions about her, but put him at ease and think he was amongst friends. Pharaoh asked him about being able to provide someone with some illicit substances. Pharaoh explained to Gale that she was interested in some medicines she knew of that could cause people to fall unconscious very quickly. Uninterested in talking about this in the open, but very interested in making a business deal, Gale invited Pharaoh to his home, a very small hovel nearby in the city. Once inside, he began explaining that he could in fact sell her some drugs or other items if she was interested. However, Pharaoh wanted to keep things quick. She now knew where he lived, and she had built up a small rapport with him. So Gale sold her the drugs she had been looking for and said that if she's ever in need of more, she can always come and find him. Thus, Pharaoh knew where Gale was and had an open invitation to talk to him in the future. The rest of the party would then follow one of the leads they did have for the journal. It seemed to refer to a barn somewhere. And they began searching through every barn with connections to this warehouse, where they stored their animals, other supplies. And they eventually found one barn that seemed to be where most of their items had been stored, or at least most of their animals that the warehouse used for drawing their carriages and their wagons. They, once inside, were able to find out who the owner of this barn was and questioned a few of the people guarding it about who had been welcomed in, when, and for what reasons. They found out very quickly that it seems a man had been brought in to deal with a sick animal at some point, that he seemed very on edge the entire time. Gaining the name of this vet, they proceeded onward. They recognized his name, after all. It was one of the names in the journal that they believed was connected to one of the debts owed to the warehouse. Following this lead, they found a man and his family at a wealthier area of the city. It seems they'd been able to afford a nicer house here, though with a man able to do veterinarian work, it's no wonder why. Questioning the man, he then explained that, yes, he had taken on some deep debts with those people, and that he was occasionally brought out to different barns where they had injured animals as a method of paying off his debts. However, he did not know anything about where they would be having people. Every barn he had been taken to had only included animals or supplies. He'd never seen anything so dark as human prisoners. Though he did have a lead by telling them that the man who owned the barn did frequent business with the warehouse. And so that was the party's next stop. This man was very jolly, a bit portly, as he owned half of the barns for storing animals within city limits. While there's plenty of space outside, finding places to store horses and cows can be a little more difficult. So this man had grown very wealthy, selling the privilege to store animals within his barns. But the party was not interested in a delicate questioning. The first thing that happened, I believe, was Tortuga broke the man's nose. And then immediately the question started. Why was he dealing with the warehouse? What was his agreement with them? Why would he dare traffic people? This man seemed to be unaware entirely of the moving of people throughout his barns. He explained that he checked always to make sure that only things being moved were what were agreed upon, and that the only business dealings he had outside of it was a local gnome herbalist. He said he knew that man had connections with the warehouse and himself, and that he was used for the buying and selling of more illicit substances. At that, the party would take this hint and would begin to craft a map of what was happening with this underground. They would reconvene with Pharaoh, who would explain to them that she had actually found Gale and knew where his house was, and that she would be able to take them to speak with him. The party was very interested in this idea. And so, instead of going first to the drug dealer that they knew lived in the town, they decided Gale would have all the answers they needed and would start heading out to find him. Of course, this would take some time. And that was the end of session 3. The party has begun to find the edges of this underground. They now wish to question Gale about his comings and goings and what has happened within the warehouse. Gabriel still floats around as well, and the boy is still missing. And so, with that, we will be ending today's story time. I am personally growing a bit parched and find talking too much at this stage is growing harder and harder. However, I am very much open to questions or comments from anybody. Most importantly, I'm very curious what everybody would like to see moving forward. I will be doing another D&D stream next Saturday, and I'm wondering what people would like to hear more about. Discussing the lore of the world. Looking into the homebrew rules I like to add into my campaigns, or maybe going into some more homebrew. I do have a collection of homebrewed races and classes I have been working on for a long time. I know people might be interested in looking into how I go about homebrewing entire classes, or just interested in seeing what homebrew classes I've made and how they work. So I'll go ahead and take a minute to write up a poll to kind of ask you guys what you'd like to see next stream. In that time, however, I would like to invite, if they're still here and listening, a couple of members from my party to come on up and talk about sessions 1 through 3, or at least as much as they could remember. I believe I have Gorgo, Milkblade, or Lotus out there. If you'd like, I'd be very happy if you guys would like to come on in and talk a bit about going through these sessions from your side. What do you guys say? Does anybody out there as viewers have any questions for my party members or would like to hear their side of this telling? Let's see questions. What would All right, and we'll give you guys a few minutes to go over this poll. There we go. Here we go. So I've got a poll up now, seeing what you guys would be interested in seeing next stream. Would you like to see me go down into some world lore, talk about my homebrewing of races and classes, or just have a stream entirely dedicated to telling the story of my campaign so far? All at once, of course. Okay, Night Pigeon, do you stream or record your D&D session? No, we do not stream or record my D&D sessions. When I had started at session 0, we had not actually kind of discussed that possibility and hadn't been thinking about it. And so it's unlikely to happen in the future just because that's not something I kind of want to put onto as a choice for any of my players. I might, at some time in the distant future, do some streaming of actual sessions, though that would be very distant and not something that would happen probably even this year. Let's see here. I'm gonna time it all at once. Well, who would be interested? So I got Milkblade, Largorgo. If you two want to hop in, it doesn't look like Lotus is typing right now. Oh, all three of you are here, actually. 1 second then. I'll get you guys upped and volumed. Okay, can I get a test?
Yeah, what's up?
Okay, you're coming in pretty quiet, Dylan.
Oh, well, let me adjust. How's that?
There we go, Lotus. Good job, good job. So we've got Lotus. And if you
Hey.
could give me race, class, and the name of your character.
Yeah, so I play Tortuga Lokrin, a wood elf monk.
All right. We have Gorgo.
Hello, that's me.
And do we have... Yeah.
Yeah, racing class, that thing. Sorry.
Yeah, that.
No, I was the one playing Milo, the under the bridge, the halfling bard.
Okay. And do we have Milkblade here?
I am here.
And you want to tell them what your role was during these early sessions?
Yeah, I was not yet introduced character-wise, so I played the role of hiding in the or watching from the bushes.
Yeah.
And I was the observer, and I would just kind of take notes and things.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
Yeah, early on, we had kind of had a party that I wasn't sure if I wanted to make larger or not at the time, but my friend Milkblade here wanted to get into some degree. And so we ended up just saying, hell yeah, dude, you can come and observe and like joke around with everybody during sessions. And if we're ever at a point where we're looking to expand or we're needing to like plug somebody in, we'll just be kind of calling on you to do some stuff.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Although right now, if you want, just you can actually give a character introduction. Who are you playing now in the campaign?
I play a Warforged Shade, which is Eric's homebrew class that he's made, and I figured I would give it a go, see how it runs in there. And yeah, my character is Perch Kurama.
All right. So, everybody watching the stream, if you have any questions, please feel free to kind of post them up. I will read off any questions you guys have. However, I've got a few for starting off. Most of these will be kind of focused on, obviously, sessions 1 through 3, though I think I've got a few for, like, some, like, basically session 0.5 stuff that we did. But if we can start off, let's see here. Milo and Tortuga. You two had a very interesting introduction to each other.
Oh God.
Sure, that's the word for it.
Tortuga was first brought in. He was in the midst of death saving throws and was basically in a very desperate state when Milo, you showed up and ended up using a healing spell on him.
Oh my goodness, yes, you see a knocked out person on the side of the road, people are calling for help. I mean, you have a little halfling who's just getting out, starting an adventure. Oh boy, I get to be able to help someone. I'm going to come over here and cast Cure Wounds on this wounded person.
Mm-hmm. And Tortuga, after your shocking fight with a boar, waking up in the middle of the street, do you remember what your first action was?
I mean, it's a little hard to remember, but yeah. After being almost gutted by a bunch of boars, your first instinct when you come back to consciousness is not, oh, I must be safe. It's I gotta fight. Like I gotta get out of here. So of course, the first thing Tortuga does is throws a punch, and yeah.
Yeah, so your guys' introduction to each other was a swift punch, it seemed.
In a cracked tooth.
In a cracked tooth. Luckily, that was able to get fixed rather quickly.
Magic. It's fucking not scientific.
It's not scientific at all, no. So, I guess after that, you guys, of course, went out and you ended up in your fight with the bears. I don't know if you guys what was that first fight kind of like for you guys? Going out there and then suddenly being faced with creatures that seemed really tough for kind of your first fight.
Well, it was rather stressful, I would say. Like, I remember fucking Tortuga doing a bunch in that fight. Lots of punching.
Lots of it, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think I wasn't really too worried because in that 0.5 session that we ran, I remember it being at like level 1 instead of level 2. So there wasn't like at least for the monk class, level 2 is a big power spike for them because then they get their key points. And so once you get your key points, you're able to do a little bit more and it gives you a bit more survivability than at like level 1.
Okay. So, I guess coming into this campaign, I know I had kind of built it up a lot about having this huge world, tons of countries and everything. And I even had most everybody kind of make their own country. So just kind of gonna go down with you guys. What was kind of your expectations coming into this campaign based on the description I'd give and uh Gorgo?
I would have no idea what's going on. So I tried to make a character that equally had very little clue about what was actually going on. So it was a little bit easier to role play in it, and kind of learn as we went.
Okay. So for you, a big part was kind of making basically like how TV shows have that character that gets everything explained to them
Yes.
because they need it.
Yes, I was the audience's insert character.
All right. And Lotus, how about you?
For me, I kind of spent a while writing a backstory for this guy. So, and having just like these little intricate and already kind of like developed ideas of certain countries and certain places. So it was kind of coming in with that pre-built notion of I know what I want to this guy to do, and he's gonna do what he can to make it happen.
Okay. So kind of opposed to Gorgo's Milo character, you more so came in having a lot of knowledge about a couple of places, being very focused in what you knew.
Yeah.
Okay. And finally, Milkblade.
Uh, I guess kind of similar to Milo's approach to it with the kind of learning and everything. Because I got to, at least meta wise, I was able to learn a decent amount outside of sessions and things because he would bounce a few like map and a few lore stuff things off of me, and it was really interesting. I love the like the evolving aspect of the world because you have all this history to it, but it's not like, oh, this is how the world is set, and that's just where it is. Do as you please. There are things that are going on that we don't even know about party wise. Like there's like beings are doing things, and the world is being affected, and we don't have any idea about that. So it's a constantly evolving and changing world, and like the change and discovery of all that, I kind of reflected that in my character a bit that I have is that because it's an odd race with the way you have lore wise and things. So I really made that a big part of Perch's backstory and stuff of how he's just so rare and like it's kind of a just a weird thing for him to even be in existence. So
Hmm.
I love the mystery and discovery of all these different things that are changing and happening as the world is going on.
Okay. And then kind of for until anybody out there in the audience has any questions that they might have for any of my party members, this stream I kind of focused on talking about my making of magic items, kind of some of the groups I put magic items into, and kind of the methodologies I have for why I make certain magic items. And so I guess a couple of questions I could have is first of all, just for all of you, I guess one of the big things I did for quite a few of the magic items I made was try to make them as a way to explain how certain characters had incredible abilities or abilities that go a bit beyond like what a class would have, and to also give this impression that you have the possibility, because that's not just something inherent to their character, like this one specific elf is able to do this thing, but more so this elf has this item that lets them do this thing. Part of me is I'm trying to inspire this feeling of, well then yeah, if I go beat that guy, then I can do that thing. I know you guys have only encountered a few enemies at this stage that have like openly bared their magic items, but particularly with Quickling and Sethic,
Mhm.
I don't know if you guys do you feel like you've had that impression like with your
Yeah,
enemies, if you beat them, you're really able to almost outside of experience grow from what they had.
almost assuredly. Yes.
Yes, for sure.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah,
Gives you a reason to like re-encounter characters or people that you've met previously and kind of like match up to it.
okay. So, okay, I got a few questions actually from people here. Uh I'll go ahead and say, do you guys have a very RP heavy game?
I think generally, there's definitely been a couple sessions where we just straight up did not have combat.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. It
I
it
like
tends
to.
to, I'd say it rests in the middle.
Like, we don't exactly have characters that are built to exist in a strictly RP system. Like, I don't think we have anybody whose main stat is charisma, and
We barely have anyone with a charisma stat.
I'd say we have, on average, a very average charisma stat against, well, maybe a little lower than average. But
Yeah.
I think that we do have a lot of sessions where it can get very heavy RP, but that's also comes from like us being a bunch, like a close knit group of friends where we can just go off on each other and have these little tangents and whatnot that our characters have with each other.
Mm.
And then there's also like the sessions where it's a lot of combat or focusing on like our quote unquote story aspect.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I like the feeling of it's kind of like a very long form thing. I don't like to think of it as, oh, this session was all combat. Oh, this session was all RP. I like the feeling of it being just, oh, this continuous flow that just kind of stops and starts at different points.
Yeah.
So I've yet to get burnt out of either RP or combat, honestly. I think the balance has been struck very well with it. And I enjoy joking around as much as I do shooting fireballs and covering myself in shadows and things.
and getting traumatized.
Yep.
Yeah, the emotional trauma is always
So
a
much
fun part when you can
pain.
mix the RP and the combat.
That's
So
never
much
part of the
pain.
marketing for D&D, but it's always there.
All right.
If
This
you buy
one.
now, you'll get this.
All right. So Vulcan, this question seems to be a bit more for me. So it's more of a unique item system rather than special dude. I mean, what I'd say is there are definitely a lot of special dude monsters that are just inherently magical that are enemies in the game. But I like having items tied to them in a way that just makes it more interesting to fight and engage with them. Plus, a lot of the special dudes are going to be very old wizards or super special heroes that are maybe at a stage that is extremely dangerous for anyone to take on. I would say I don't strip out special dudism, but I definitely prefer having a lot of unique features being tied to items. So it's more solid, more graspable, and something my players can more go, okay, if we can get that away from him, or after we beat him, if we can get that, that's very powerful.
If we can take off his pants, he'll be vulnerable.
When we don't have a bard anymore.
All right. And also another thing I've noticed in this campaign that I'll actually ask you guys your opinions on is I've done a lot more of humanoid enemy focusing. So a lot of like the fantastical beasts and where to find them. I haven't been playing in so much, at least at this stage, but it's been a lot more humanoids have been kind of the antagonists or the enemies. So I think trying to lend them a little more of that fantastical element while still keeping in that vein tends to lead me towards doing a more item focused idea.
Mm.
But I'm curious, do you guys feel like you mostly there have definitely been fights with like beasts and creatures such as the thorn what are they? The thorn blights?
Vine blights.
Vine
Oh,
blights,
the
Vine blights and the
and
like?
willows.
But
Yeah.
I guess how would you guys say that like you've been majority against like humanoid enemies or antagonists?
I think generally, but we've been in areas where that's been the case.
Okay.
Like, we
Yeah.
haven't. I mean, we did go through the Elvish Valley, but we did end up fighting like fucking meanlocks there. So there were, but those are kind of like humanoid type monsters. I don't know. We're right now in like a like farm, not a Farmville place, but like a Witcher 3 like farm town full of bandits and stuff. So it makes sense that we haven't fought any like big boys right now.
All right. I've got a really good one, and we're going to start with Milkblade on this. Do you guys
Ooh.
try to keep the game serious, or do you play it more goofy?
I like to try to strike a balance. At least that's what I try to go for. If like at the you always think you're doing something right, and then you realize, and then someone tells you, yeah, it's coming off completely differently. So, like I've been trying to strike a balance between the seriousness and the funny. Like there's a running gag with my character Purge. He's Warforged, and he's always wearing his armor that's melded with his body, so they don't know what he is, and that's a huge part of his character. And so one running gag is that he's 3 goblins in a suit of armor, and the party just jokes about that all the time, and we'll joke about that in character, and we'll have all these gags and things that are super fun and really cool, and then 2 seconds later, one of us will lose their freaking mind. One of us will have a vision. There'll be a backstory. Some kind of thing pops up for somebody. There's a moral quandary. Like I'm not going to say it like flips on a dime, but I think it's been very well like flowing into itself of like, oh, like you're having fun one moment and the next is pretty serious. I think it's been pretty balanced so far, and I've enjoyed playing like that because it means that we're not bogged down with serious stuff, and we're not constantly just, oh, I roll the seduce the dragon and all that stuff.
And you, Lotus?
I think there's a good balance between the goof and the serious, a lot like what Milkblade was saying, where you can be like super serious about like, oh, we have to find this kid that has been taken from his family, and then you can also have a tangent of, well, I'm better at lying than you are. No, I'm better at lying than you are, and I'm going to prove it by lying to you. And so it's just like, I feel like there's a healthy balance between the goof and the serious, which makes it a lot more enjoyable than it just being like, oh, complete all jokes aside, or all jokes, or just all serious, like stuff like that.
And Gorgo.
I feel like it's generally a very serious world. There hasn't been a lot of like outright jokes I've seen coming from you, the DM, and a lot of the silliness comes from the party. But it leads that in very nice contrast where I remember one session where I've swapped characters and I'm playing an elvish wizard at this point, and we end up changing the sign with illusion magic of a tavern from Tevers Keep to Femboy Hooters.
Juicy femboy who it
Juicy
said
Femboy
juicy.
Hooters. I apologize. And we're having a great time shooting the shit in the tavern, and we're all walking around, and then we hear, hey, you guys we're gonna go to a hanging later today. And all of a sudden, it's this extremely dark hanging scenario where we have a crowd of people cheering for deserters being killed, and it's like, whoa.
Yeah.
So it is very much like a sweet and spicy sort of flavor.
Let's see if this works. Ah, shoot. Do I not have my kick set up? 1 second. So we got one kick redeem. Whoa, there he goes. He just disappeared into, where is that? 1 sec. Gotta go zoom in on where he just went to. Bolonesia. Good for you. Going to Bolonesia.
Oh man, I can't
I was really hoping he lands right on top of the party.
Nah, he's gonna crash land into Scarin and destroy it. So actually,
What's
we're
left of it?
That's what happened.
Hey guys, no spoilers. So it looks
What?
like the vote
Hey.
came in, and you guys are going to be interested in looking at more lore next stream. So I'll be setting up Saturday to be doing thank you, Vulcan. Doing my next stream focusing kind of on a few countries' lores, and be picking out a few of the fun ones. Then I'll go into like the next 2 sessions worth of stories, and I'll see if I can't get a couple more of my players on and give you guys any answers to questions you have. However, because I'm certain a lot of people are curious how this got into the world, would any of the 3 of you like to close up with telling us the entire saga of the growth of Femboy Hooters in our campaign?
Oh shit! I'm gonna go last.
Oh, Malachite isn't here though.
I feel like
that
we
is
have to have
true, but-
Malachite explain that.
All right, then we can hold on. I just wanted to raise it up while we had Perch here with his own little side session on it.
I mean, I'm happy to tell
Oh.
the story of that.
All right, so we'll definitely go into more detail on how it started at a later date. One of our players got really interested in both dancing goblin boys and the concept of femboy hooters within a D&D world. But there was at one point where, ooh, how many players do I have? We actually currently play with a party of 6 players. However, a lot of sessions, 1 or 2 players will have to be out for that weekend. And so we range from 4 to 6 during most sessions. Though lately we've been getting a lot of full sessions with everybody in it together. So there was one session, however, where for the beginning half of it, unfortunately, Perch was not there for, because the party had headed out on a quest when he couldn't be there for that first session. So Perch decided he would, during his downtime, write up a little story about something that happened to him during that half a session. And if you wish to give the footnotes, because we will be closing up in a couple of minutes here, Perch, what was your experience with femboy hooters?
So the abridged Femboy Hooters story is so I had to miss the session, and what happened was Perch was reading some books, and he's like, "All right, I'm gonna go stretch my legs a bit, just walk around a bit." And he comes across this restaurant thing in the city. And it's like, "Yeah, well, I wonder what this place is like," because he sees the funny looking owl and he likes birds. And so he walks on in, and he's greeted by a very flamboyant and very girlish appearing. Oh crap! What was? Yeah. I made it a fox girl. Was
Oh,
what it was, because I just went full bore on that. So he's greeted by the fox girl waiter there, who I named Bailey. And it's just I wrote up a full 5-page doc, like a script of Perch and his inner self dealing with the antics of femboy hooters and the furry femboy hooters.
I think
And there's just a bunch of just awful gags with that. And then he's walking out, and like he gets a kiss on the cheek, and he's just like internally screaming, like just and it's, ugh. And like he's walking back, and he sees them blow a little kiss from the hooters, and he's like, okay, I'm done going out on my own for a little while. But that was the latest installment of Femboy Hooters, aside from the juicy Femboy Hooters sign
Hmm.
that we made with the illusion.
Okay.
I feel like femboy hooters might just be a manifestation of the far realm or something. Um, It's slowly corrupting people around the world.
It's just our quest to eventually get it fully canonized, because
God.
Eric doesn't want to read the
It's-
script I wrote.
It's the BBUG. We have to stop the spread of
We have
femboy
to
hooters.
stop femboy hooters from taking over the world.
Okay. Well, thank you, you 3, for coming in and answering the questions that people had, and answering my questions.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah,
Yeah,
hope
thank
to
you.
set up a better system in the future for getting people in and doing questions. And then if you guys are interested, some point a few weeks down the line, maybe having some people coming in and just sort of presenting your character in character, you know?
Oh Jesus!
Ooh, that sounds cool. Actually, I like
Mhm.
that.
I have to do the accent then.
Oh yeah. Now
Yeah.
you will suffer for choosing to be French. All right. So we're going to be closing up here in a couple minutes now. If anybody else out there has any last minute questions or requests or anything they're curious about or would like to hear about in a later stream, now is your last 2 to 3 minutes to get those messages on out. Otherwise, we will be saying goodnight and hopefully seeing all of you again for next stream. While we're waiting to see if anyone out there's got any stuff, do you guys have any questions about the first couple of sessions we had for me? I know we've
Uh,
always had like opportunities, but if like anything like retrospective or anything you're trying to remember at this point.
Was it Tortuga that broke that guy's nose, or was it Ras?
Honestly,
like, it's not out of character for me, but
yeah, I
I don't
think
remember
both
the
of you
full happening.
actually punched him.
Oh,
That
well,
definitely.
that would do it.
I know both
Yeah,
of you
that's
punched
okay.
him. I just couldn't remember which one of you actually broke his nose.
Hmm.
So shockingly, I decided to attribute it to the monk.
It makes sense.
It
makes
does
sense.
make sense.
First encounter with everyone was him coming out swinging. So
Yeah, Tortuga has a habit of punching people as a greeting.
hey,
As a greeting.
was it as a greet? Well, for Milo, yeah.
He gets special treatment.
He does. He does. If everyone else knew his lore like we knew it, they'd agree. I
Hey,
think.
no giving away the god of death thing.
Please,
Hmm.
the god of murder,
Remember, guys, secret warlock.
secret warlock, always.
Oh god. Hey Eric, can I get an ara ara before you go? How about this?
Oh no.
I'll do it last. If these three will all give us in order an ara ara. Are you guys ready? I like to start with Milkblade on this.
Okay, yeah.
Oh,
I have
alright,
objections.
break out now you're in it now, Lotus.
Yep.
Oh, no.
All right. Ara.
Gorgo. Alright. Lotus.
Ara.
Progressively more distressed.
Thank you very much, Wood, for coming in. Good night to all of you, and ara ara.